The Cambridge Community Foundation recently released their Equity and Innovation Report. This research report is a comprehensive look at all things Cambridge, with a concentration on how innovation has or has not impacted the areas of housing, incomes, ethnicities, ideas, and much, much more. Tonight on The Public Square, we're going to take a deeper dive into the intersection of innovation and the educational achievement gap for Black and brown students in the Cambridge Public Schools.
Educational inequality is probably more than anything else the fundamental root of broader inequality. If we look at inequality in access to particular careers, inequality in income and wealth, inequality in the nature of political participation, all those things are mitigated by equalizing the skills that education produces, not only the academic skills, but the dispositions, the frames of minds, the conscientiousness, the diligence, the sense of agency. And so I think there is nothing more important we could do to produce the type of society we want than to raise outcomes in the field of education so that knowing somebody's race or ethnicity tells you nothing at all about what their test scores or grades or occupation might be.
We know the story. We've read the statistics. But Cambridge, one of the world's leading academic and innovation meccas, has 55% of Black and brown students not meeting or partially meeting the critical third grade reading benchmark.
I grew up in the inner city, and there were kids who were failing in schools 56 years ago when I first went to school. And those schools are still lousy today. 56 years later. And you know something about a lousy school? It's not like a bottle of wine, right? Where you say like 87 was like a good year, right? That's not how this thing, I mean, every single year, it's still the same approach, right? One size fits all. If you get it, fine, and if you don't, tough luck. Just tough luck. Why haven't we allowed innovation to happen? Do not tell me we can't do better than this. Look, you go into a place that's failed kids for 50 years, and you say, so what's the plan? And they say, well, we're going to do what we did last year this year. What kind of business model is that?
Studies have shown that children reading below grade level, coming out of the third grade, are more likely to face myriad challenges: high school dropout, lowered future earning potential, and a higher incarceration rate.
Yes, I would like to point out a research study that me and two colleagues, Kenneth Anderson at Howard and Keith Howard at UCLA, we looked at this issue, and we focused specifically on Black boys in middle school and the correlation between their reading achievement and their suspension rates. And what we found, unfortunately, and perhaps unsurprisingly, is that those students who struggled with their reading proficiency were more likely to be suspended from school. So in the sixth grade, if a student were struggling to read, then that student was more likely to be suspended in the seventh grade and subsequent suspensions downrange. We also found the same thing with respect to disabilities. So students who had been diagnosed with disabilities in the fifth grade, that was a significant predictor for suspensions in the sixth grade, and then future suspensions downrange. So this issue obviously is one that's highly problematic, is one that's truly concerning. And for me, as it relates to our students of color, it becomes even more concerning because we see these huge disparities and gaps between reading proficiency and academic achievement. So unfortunately, the research bears true, and this is work that we have to continue to investigate and find solutions so we can ensure that people are becoming better readers, which we hope then will influence their academic achievement.
Tonight, on The Public Square, Cambridge Conversations, we'll tackle the obvious questions regarding how we got here, and more importantly, how we make a positive and impactful change.
My name is Cedric Forte. I'm a junior at Heritage High School, 425.
My name is Jackson Langvort. I'm 18-year-old and I'm a senior at McLean High School. For academic subjects, I'm in Advanced Placement Literature,
English,
Advanced Placement U.S. Government,
Biology,
and Comparative Government,
Art,
Advanced Placement Music Theory,
Health,
Geosystems for Science,
and Algebra.
Men's Chorus,
What's it?
Leadership, and Technical Theater.
When the country cares about something, we'll spend $1 trillion without blinking an eye. When the safety of America is threatened, we will spend any amount of money. The real safety of our nation is preparing its next generation so that they can take our place and be the leaders of the world when it comes to thinking and technology and democracy and all that stuff we care about. I dare say it's a pittance what it would require for us to really begin to solve some of these problems.
When you think about the report, particularly I want to talk about housing. In the report it reads, Cambridge rental costs are nearly twice the innovation city median. Cambridge is among the most expensive innovation city when it comes to the cost of living for both owners and renters. When you hear that, and you're from this city, and you think about everything that your generations of Cantabrigians come from, a lot lineage of generations of Cantabrigians. When you hear that, what comes to mind?
Thank you again for having me. Happy to be here as always. And when I think of housing, it's funny. I think we talked about it initially when we started talking about this report, but 10, 12 years ago, I was still living in the port, and I've probably had to move 2 to 3 times since then. So that shows you the amount of times that I've had to hop around in the city simply just to stay here. And that looking at the report and seeing just the evaporating, for a lack of a better term, like Black population that's living here, and while the people of color populations living here, it's just showing detailed for something that we've already known and we've already felt for the past 2 decades, that we're getting pushed out and being moved out, and there isn't a plan for us to stay. So for Cambridge to be the city that's a melting pot and one that champions diversity, it's like they championed the diversity. Now there's no way for that diversity to actually stay here. So when we were thinking about ways for innovation, which is going to be something I'll probably be talking about a lot throughout this time that we have here, is even in these inclusionary programs or these homeowner buyership programs, making sure that we are, I don't want to say prefacing, but making sure that we are prioritizing in some way or another the Black and people of color residents that truly make this city so great. So whether if that's the inclusionary program, making sure that even if it's somebody that doesn't live in the city anymore, but they might have grown up here for their whole lives and then got pushed out. When we look at the inclusionary program, I know there's like a point system and a hierarchy system of who ends up getting to the top of the list. If you lived in Cambridge for 5 to 10 years, why can't that be a point? Or if you went to high school here, why can't that be a point? Or if your mother grew up here, something of the sort. We just other different forms of innovation. And then going, I know it's kind of separate, but in the same thing when we think about our public development units. So I'm sure we have some by Harvard. We definitely have one. We have some by MIT. And I think to the time of Counselor Jackson, when he had it in Roxbury, where they had like a computer science, like kind of center right in Roxbury. And it's like, why couldn't we do that for innovation here in the city? So I think it's in the report, we have like the highest percentage of individuals working in innovation throughout the whole 25 major cities or whatsoever. And what if we started having those individuals that are in MIT and in Harvard going to those, the Dasani Center, going to the Mission or these other public youth centers and having them teach computer science? Then we're transitioning them to know the computer science or the different STEM programs that are in the city on their own time, in their own backyard, and then being able to transition them to STEM and different innovation programs, many of the companies that are now coming into our backyard and kind of removing space from us. Why not get those kids the ability to work there, allowing them to then make the money and the income. I think it's what, 95,000 or so is annual income. So having them compete within their own city, and then giving them the ability to not only rent, but then to have to be some type of homeowner. So there's multiple gaps throughout the whole thing, but definitely in the housing in general, just finding more innovative ways to make sure that the kids that are or children, youth, young adults that are currently living here or have already lived here, making sure that we're not forgetting about them, which is what throughout the detail of this report of the last 10 to 13 years, it seems that not only that we've forgotten about them, but it just seems like we don't care.
So you talked about innovation a lot. Thank you, Elijah. So Nico, Elijah mentioned a number of things. One thing he mentioned in terms of, he looked at who's here, who isn't here. One thing that the report speaks to, and what I found fascinating, is that we have less, since 1990 to 2018, we have less young people from 0 to 17 in our community. But we do see an emergence of folks from 21 to 28. Now, obviously, you're a Cambridge kid. Just curious in terms of when you think about the emergence of that 21 to 28-year-olds, is that your population of young people? Is that a new population of young people? And if it is or it isn't, how do we stabilize this community, to Elijah's, use Elijah's word, how do we become more innovative so that we are able to say the 21 to 28-year-olds are Cambridge kids? At least a large swath of them are Cambridge kids.
100%. I beat this point like a drum constantly in every place I'm in. But the reality is that kids cannot come home because they cannot either afford the rent here in Cambridge, or because they are low income and living in Section 8 housing, or with the crowded families, they don't have the opportunity to live at home after graduation, right? And that's one of the biggest factors of young people not only gaining wealth, but gaining experience, and allowing themselves to really grow in the professional world, right? So that opportunity does not exist for recent college grads and young professionals to come back and live in their own city, whether that's, again, being kept out for rent or being kept out, right, for reasons like living in affordable housing. And that's a problem. And you see time and time again, the biggest way for people to, gain experience and build their wealth post-college is by living at home. And we need to have a closer examination of our housing practices, like the recertification process, Section 8 housing, and find ways for kids to live at home without having to put their family at risk for eviction, or having to perjure themselves and lie to hide their salary so their parents' rent doesn't go up, right? The list goes on and on. But I see that as one of the biggest hindrances of keeping kids in that age range from coming back to Cambridge, right? And again, we all know this anecdotally. We see it, right? As Ringe graduates, we see who's coming back, right? And it's the kids who have an opportunity to live at home and to grow. And we need to create more opportunities for our Black and brown students to come back to the city and to grow their wealth and to establish roots for the future.
When you're talking, I remember I was working in New York. I was teaching, and there was a gentleman, I think his name was Jimmy McMillan. He was running on a platform as the rent's too damn high. I don't know how many folks on this call remember that, but it was a fascinating conversation that looked at the displacement of folks who were native New Yorkers being pushed out of New York. And what the particular party did is that they looked at the disparities around economics, right? And so when you think, I'll go back to you, Chrissy, if I may. The report has a number of startling statistics, but one in which that caught me was the median income for a Black family is $30,000. The median income of a single Black person is $13K. And then it's even amplified in other spaces when you talk about the disparities in terms of Black and white. But we all know in terms of when we hear something like, maybe when I was growing up, you'd be excited about getting $30,000 for a job, for a job. But the reality is, in terms of we are going off to school, and you guys have done all of the right things. And when you hear those numbers, what comes to mind, for you?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I think a lot comes to my mind. I think that there are multiple barriers in place. I think that the rise in the cost of education plays a significant role in that. It's hard to go back to school. Unless you have good credit, unless you can kind of like take out that money from the bank, how are you going to afford to go to college? So I think that plays a significant role in it. I think that, within the job sector, there's racism and people not wanting to hire Black and brown folks. Like, it's just that. And there's also specifically in the city of Cambridge, it's hard to move on, and there isn't a lot of room for growth unless you really prove yourself. And so I think that in this, with this equity gap, that's where we're seeing a lot of the problems, is within like the ability to get the education, to get the job, and be able to earn that income.
You know, you need to earn the income. You said something that I'll open up to everybody, but Chrissy said something, earn that income. And when we hear about income, one of the things that I find synonymous with income, and I'm going to kind of piggyback on a little bit what Elijah and Nico said about housing. So when you speak of housing, Cambridge has an exclusionary housing program, as we all know of. It's designed to keep young professionals and families who earn enough to qualify for this type of housing, but not enough to buy a home. So it's a fascinating dichotomy, right? Now, are you familiar with the program? And you said something around barriers. Why do you think the program isn't marketed to reach your generation or demographic, considering it's supposed to, it's targeted towards your generation and demographic, but it doesn't appear to be marketed to the young folks? Why do what do you think? What do you think's going on there?
I'll take it. I mean, it's simply just a numbers game. Simply, you said the average is 33,000, correct?
Well, 30,000.
30,000.
Maybe it's 33 now,
And then you said a single resident is probably 13, and the average for the inclusionary housing program is 42,800. If I'm might be spitballing that, but somebody in the city can check me out for that. But yeah, that's what, even if for the highest average family, that's still a 13 or damn near $13,000 difference. And then if you're trying to be a single individual moving back and then trying to get your own, that's damn near $23,000 difference. So you take that and then pair that with school loans and just livelihood and trying to figure out your way from college and figuring out what that smorgasbord is. There's not really an ability within this city, simply just off numbers. That's not me even going to anything else, where Black youth, Black college educated individuals are able to come back. And that's for those of us that make it. So I know that we've talked to Ty, we've talked to you, we've gone through a lot of the statistics, and I think it's like 1 in 3 Black college. It's like 1 in 3 of a percentage of the individuals that graduate from RINs actually end up obtaining a degree within 6 years. So whether that's an associate's, whether that's a bachelor's, whether that's like a real estate license. So that's dwindling the population more and more and more. So just off of a strict numbers game, I can see it's very aggravating. It's very frustrating for us that want to stay in the city, but it's not rocket science. It's a targeted measure, it seems like. And it's one of those systemic things where, as much as they would love for us to stay in the city, if we've known these reports and see that, if we're getting pushed out and we're not getting the capital and we're not being provided the economic and educational opportunities to stay in here, somebody simply could have looked at the books and seen if a $13,000 difference is the key in what's stopping and preventing us from staying in the city, that should be changed. But then again, it comes to innovation and people having to think a little bit differently, which
I just want to clarify. The income for a Black person in Cambridge is about $13,000. The median income from a Black family is about $30K. Now, the difference between a white family and a Black family is roughly about $65K. Mm-hmm. So, that's a great disparity. But one of the things in which you talked a great deal about coming home, coming back. Nico, I'm gonna go to you. How do we connect recent college grads to the innovation sector in Cambridge? Right? I mean, we talk about the booming innovation, sector here in Cambridge. It's said to be the most, the most innovative mile in the world, obviously. But we don't have Cambridge grads, Cambridge kids there. Is there something we could be doing at the high school a little differently to kind of, provide opportunities to shadow, to see these things earlier than later? Exposure. Is there enough efforts put forth by the companies to recruit kids from Cambridge, and specifically to recruit Black and Latinx kids from Cambridge? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. I think you nailed it right there. It has to start at an earlier age. So the example I always use, right? Cambridge is full of opportunity, but they don't ever tell you about that opportunity until it's too late, right? The kid who goes to Harvard, that didn't start freshman year of high school. That journey started a long time ago, right? Building the core skills, the extracurriculars, all that stuff that goes into being an applicant for a school or a university institution like that, right? And the problem is you need to start building kids up first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade with these ideas and with these opportunities that they belong in these institutions, whether they're academic or whether they're, in the technology sector or the Kendall Square or whatever it may be. And the more kids can feel a part of that at an earlier age, then they'll have an easier path, kind of seeking those opportunities out later in life. And I think a lot of times we don't tell these kids that there's these opportunities until it's already too late. And I think there needs to be a bigger emphasis on preparing our kids for this innovation sector at a much earlier age.
And to that, I want to stay with you for a second. Part of why I mentioned the Innovation Center, because, it's going to make more money there than maybe some of the other jobs we find ourselves into. And not to hear to disparage anyone who may kind of land a job at the youth center or whatever, but there is a great disparity, right? And you guys are coming out of college and you have, mountains of debt, right? And so how do you position yourself with the reality that you have, an enormous amount of debt? You live in you live in a city, or you've come from a city that has a great deal of innovation and, proximity to dollars, right? And you guys have all done the right thing. And that there's a great, the trajectory of your lives will shift if you're in one type of opportunity versus another opportunity because of the mounting debt. So how do you reconcile this idea that in terms of you've done everything that was right? You took care of everything, you got up every day, you worked hard, you went to college, you came back. But the pipeline to work in your city is often to a lower wage job versus a higher wage job, but you have this mountain of debt. So Nico, I'll start with you and feel free others to jump in. But in terms of looking at the reality that the debt that you may have accrued in college, but also this innovation proximity to it, it's not touching you. And what does that feel like? What are we thinking? And how do we become more creative where we get young people to have access to that innovation so that they can be able to prepare themselves for the economics that are here in our city?
One of the things I think right away, right, it's this trap, right? So and I'll use myself as an example, but I think it speaks for everyone on this call, right? Is that you are fortunate enough to make it out, right? So I'll use my path, right? And I know this is true for Booker too, right? We're fortunate enough to be college athletes. So what was the first thing I did? I came back to Ringe and coached, right? Elijah and I, we made it. We figured out all these little holes. We saw the pitfalls. So what did we do? We came back and we pursued jobs in government, right? I think the same could be said for you, jobs in the community. The problem is that it shouldn't always be our responsibility to fix those holes, right? We're plugging those holes because the city is not doing their job, right? We're working with kids, we're working with youth, we're working in the community because somebody else is dropping the ball in that area. And that's unfortunate, right? And then it just becomes this endless cycle, right, of people who make it out only to come back and help everyone else. And that's actually a really beautiful thing. However, I think it needs to be, the financial compensation for that work needs to be higher, especially if people in the city are neglecting that work to begin with. So I think, right, it's great that kids are in the youth center. It's great that we have kids coaching. It's great that we have kids working in local government, right? But then those salaries need to match the salaries that are outside of those jobs as well, right? To be more competitive, at least until the city is accountable enough to fix the problems so we don't have to.
You know what? Fix the problems. One of the things in which I think Elijah mentioned earlier, Cassandra and Chrissy, if I may come to you, you talked about starting early. Now, oftentimes we say here in Cambridge, we have a lot of initiatives where we start early, where we talk about starting early and, exposing folks to these things. And it's a number of initiatives that I think are well intended. But I want to talk a little bit about in terms of how are those messages counter to what really happens? And how are those messages, how can they be stronger to make sure that they come to fruition? That we're not just telling kids to start early to get to a place, but we're really setting them up for success to get there, and or creating other mechanisms. So hopefully that's clear. I'll start with you, Cassandra. and then we'll Chrissy, and then we'll go to Elijah. Chrissy.
Yeah, so okay, so I'm a social worker. And a part of my learning is the emphasis on the early days of life. It's about the first 1,000 days. And what I'm trying to say is that we need to prepare families for family readiness, like being able to be prepared to welcome a child into the world and feel supported. So that way they can focus on getting their child to where they need to be, whether that's school or after school programs, just resources that support these families to be able to move on to the next step and think about the future. Right now, a lot of our families, if you're making 32,000 a year, you're worried about putting food on the table, making sure there's a roof over your head. There's no room to mentalize yourself in a different position. And so it makes it really hard. It makes it almost impossible to really think about the future and getting yourself there.
Elijah, same question. Any thoughts around that?
Sure. So to kind of add on to Chrissy's point, I know being a person of color, particularly you go to school, your parents go to work. It's like it's your job to go to school and do good in school, and it's my job to go to work. And like, unless something goes bad or like you're not doing your job, like, and it's not in a bad way, like that's the only time that your parents really need to intervene. Because if you're doing good, then it's fine. Like I have my own responsibilities. You have your own responsibilities. Like there's things that we need to go and get done. I think of it like that Chrissy brought it of like early childhood. I think of it more what would have helped me in my time would have been in high school. So particularly for kids of color, I was fortunate enough to do Avid. So I had somebody that was on me, get your college essay in. This is how you ask questions. Make sure you're going to your professor. So I was able to be briefed upon that. But we have so many resources in this city that why aren't there more mentors for the kids, particularly for kids of color? So if we're realizing that they're only graduating 83% and then 1/3 of those kids are the ones that end up being deemed successful, and then even those kids maybe still might only be making on average $30,000. They might be skewing the median up more higher. But if we're all going into these public service jobs trying to save people, then we're truly not making our intellectual property, our intellectual capital isn't being utilized best for what we're trying to do. So making sure that we're preparing kids for a better safety net and a better idea of what they want to do in this going forward in their education pursuit. Another thing that I recently talked to a friend that recently ran for city council, and he told me about the programs that they had over at CCSC. And I know we kind of did something similar for MBK during the summer with the MGH program, where for CCSC, and I mean, I don't know how it's going to be implemented for Range or for public schools in itself, but for, I think it's high school seniors, they have them go to like a Biogen or a Novartis. And that class or that time that they're being graded upon that class is something that they're actually interested in. And that kind of pushes them forward of things that they might be interested in, and then kind of getting them out of the classroom into things that they actually might want to pursue. Or what I've most learned in my life is it's not always what you want to do, but it's what you don't want to do. So giving a kid in the bevy of resources that we have in Cambridge and the technology hub that we have, or the political hub that we have, the State House is only down the street, the ability to go and intern and actually be in the environment that so many of us walk by and are around, but truly don't have the information to be within.
You said something, Nico. Elijah talked about the access to other places, and we're going to take a little dive into education. But I want to start off with something that I know that for me, it was a fascinating relationship that I had with the city. Particularly as we all know, we are home to a number of universities, but I'm curious if everyone can answer this question. I'll start with you, Nico. What impact, if any, did growing up in the shadows of MIT and Harvard have on you? What role do you think those major institutions could play in helping young people grow and thrive? And I'm really just building off of some of the things that Elijah just mentioned. All feel free to kind of expound on that.
Yeah, 100%. I'll start with the positives. I mean, for one, right, we had access to their athletic facilities, right? And that's a small gesture, right? But it means the world, right? To kind of be able to use that space, right? See the possibilities of where these things can take you, not just athletically, but academically as well. And to really then make those places your home, right? Whether it's the MIT track, right, or the Harvard track, or the Harvard stadiums, right? And I think that is actually, very empowering, because I feel, I didn't attend Harvard, but I feel that those spaces are just as much mine as anyone who graduated there. So again, kind of normalizing those spaces and making them obtainable. And again, they manifest not just in an athletic way, but I know that the Harvard, they donate instruments to the school and the marching band. So there's these relationships that exist. The school newspaper, for example, uses the Harvard printing press. Again, my career has been in journalism. I remember fondly going to the Harvard printing press and seeing my articles from the school paper being printed out on the big machine, right? Those moments are really empowering. However, I only think they exist in an extracurricular space. I don't think they always exist in an academic space. I know because, again, like everyone on this call, we are the fortunate few to, take part in honors and AP classes. And again, but we know because our classmates were taking Harvard extension classes as juniors and seniors, right? That was not, that's not a reality for most of the people that we know outside of those spaces. And again, the more we can normalize those relationships in the classroom instead of outside of the classroom, I think the more we can start to empower kids, because the more we can see ourselves in those institutions, the more we will actually want to attend them and feel empowered by them.
I'm going to stay on this Harvard and MIT conversation for a little while, for a couple minutes, then we'll move on. But I think it's a critical one. But Chrissy or Elijah, feel free, would like to take this. When I think about Harvard and MIT, but I also think about how we utilize them. How can and should MIT and Harvard partner with our school district in a more meaningful way, given your own experiences on early childhood? And I want to just say that this report is written from 2008 to 2018. You guys are graduates of 2013 and 2014, respectively. And so with love, and I'm certain I did a report when I was in school, it would be very similar. But these stats, particularly around education, this is a snapshot of part of the time in which you was there. And not that Harvard and MIT are going to save all of our ills, but we all know that there are extra bodies to possibly help young people. And full disclosure, before this conversation, I had the actual privilege, along with some of my MBK colleagues, to do a training for Harvard undergrads around strategies of working, particularly with Black boys, as they look to do some volunteer work throughout the course of the year and also this summer. And one of the things that they had mentioned was that, wow, they would love to work with young people in Cambridge. They have really, they haven't, these are juniors and seniors in a lot of cases. They haven't really been given the opportunity to understand how to do that. And maybe that's a little bit of both parties to work better. Obviously, selfishly, we'll leverage that. But I'm curious, once again, how can and should MIT and Harvard partner with our school district in a more meaningful way, given your own experiences with education here in the city of Cambridge? So Chrissy, why don't you take a shot at it first? And then Elijah, you jump in, and Nico, please feel free to jump in as well.
Yeah, so a couple of summers ago, I spent some time as a program director for Harvard University's nonprofit student-led organization that offered summer camps to young people. And this summer camp was super affordable. It was $150 for the whole 8 weeks of summer. It included lunch and breakfast and field trips. And it's programs like that need to be replicated across the universities that surround us. So MIT, if they could replicate a program, I mean, they might already, but replicating these programs so they're accessible for our young people, that's what we would want to see. And, definitely making sure that they're advertised appropriately and making sure they're reaching our young people that really need these type of enrichment activities throughout the summer.
What do you think? Okay, you go first.
I was going to say through the summer, but also through the school year.
So let me follow up with that. Do you think that the school department and city, for that matter, could do a better? We'll start with the schools, then we can go to the city. I think the school department could do a better job of creating a relationship and then sharing what that relationship looks like in the course and the offerings to the community a little bit better, so that you see this and like you dream like this could be incubated here, but it's not happening. How do you think we should work with the schools a little bit more? Harvard and MIT can work with the schools a little bit more pragmatically and strategically.
So I think the city's taking some good steps, and by that I mean they're making more room in their budget to hire social workers, family liaisons, like kind of people that coordinate these tasks, these kind of programs. And so I really think that kind of hiring more social workers, honestly, I'm a little biased, but I think that by hiring more social workers, getting us involved in kind of collaborating with these universities, as a social worker, we have a unique perspective about development, social emotional learning. And I think that by hiring more social workers, we can kind of establish these connections and make them more reachable to our young folks. If we have social workers in every school, it'll be their job to pass along this information.
Thank you, Elijah. We're going to get into the schoolhouse. The report speaks of something that I found quite glaring and problematic on some levels. However, there's a 1985 report that came out with the Concerned Black Staff of Cambridge, which looked at a very similar dynamic that I'm going to speak to. And actually, the report in 1985, we were a little bit better than we are as I highlight this report. So the report stated that 1 out of 10 AP test takers are Black. Why do you think this is? And as you think about, that's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, and this, I'll start with you, Elijah. When you were junior or senior, what supports were in place to help you navigate FAFSA, financial assistance, AP? What did that look like for you during your experience at RINS? But the first part, 1 in 10 AP test takers is Black. Why do you think that is? And what supports were provided for you while at RINS?
I'm gonna try to super combine it because I did want to answer the previous part. So I'm gonna be
quick with that. Take 90 seconds to answer the previous one.
I'll be quick. I can do both. So to your with the first question that you asked, Nico, like what's the negative part and why is that there this divide? It's almost like a form of jadedness. So I've talked to friends where they're like, oh, you're from Cambridge, like it's an education hub, and it's like I used to get off at Harvard and walk through Harvard Yard to Rinch, and to this point, it just becomes another school to me. Like I live down the street from MIT. I think I went to MIT baseball camp and we'd use the track, play football there. At that point, it's just another school. Like there's obviously individuals coming and going to these universities. When we graduate from school, there's the 10 kids that live north of Harvard north of Harvard that go to Harvard, and then like the 6 or 7 kids that go to MIT. And we kind of just call it as that. Like there is no attachment, there's no engagement from either side of those communities. So it feels as if like they're just entities or things that exist within the city, but aren't for individuals within the city. So it makes sense of why you said the Black individuals that go to Harvard felt as if they wanted to be engaged, but there was no other opportunity going to the mentorship. I just said, I know there's a sizable or an approach, particularly of Harvard now, making sure that there's more people of color within the university. And if those individuals already want to get involved, I know it's very big in Leslie where they have tutors come and help out kids already with like Avid and different types of programs, just replicating things that have already seen to success, whether that's like tutoring plus or like workforce. Just like, I know there's other aspects of that within the city. Harvard's a major university, having that work on a major scale. I feel as if it could work and could be one-to-one. It's not like it's that far it's not even a drive. It's a 5 to 10 minute walk. So kids can walk down the street and end up helping our youth get to the places of where those individuals already are. Now going to the AP and honors or AP test. I know that we've talked about it with Nico. I've definitely talked about it with Chrissy and definitely with everybody else that we've kind of had these similar conversations with, is that it was an accomplishment just to get to the AP class, So like honors classes, like your friends in CP are, damn, you sure you want to take that class? Like I heard that's pretty hard, and you're able to like get a baseline. So by the time maybe freshman and sophomore year, so by the time they get to junior and senior year, when you're getting to that class, like you feel as if you made it, like you feel as if you put on for everybody by just getting to that class. And if I got an A, B, B plus, I was getting like A minus in that class. But when I got the A minus in the class, I was like, oh, I'm good. Like, why would I take an AP class? I'm not going to pass that. Like in my mind, I've already like pre-assumed that like me getting to that was my pinnacle. to say that I was limiting myself, that could be very realistic. But like to the individuals, I didn't see other individuals of my ilk, of my kin getting to those heights, and that was what they were reaching for. So then that was internalized up to what I should be reaching for those classes. Then going back to the FAFSA and kind of the overall college process, I was thankful to be an avid advanced via individual determination. So by the time that I was in senior year, by like November, I already had my Common App done. My college essay was done by like the end of junior year. I already had all of my recommendations. So I was ahead of the process. But it didn't matter black, white, blue, purple. The individuals by senior year were struggling. So particularly for our kids of color that weren't in these type of programs, they were kind of falling behind of, all right, I need my recommendations by when, or I need this by when. And there just seems to be, for as big of a school and how many resources there aren't as many safety nets as I would like to see for kids, particularly of kids of color that are wanting to go to school, attempting to go to school, and maybe needing some more circulation of information, attention, access, and action to those that want to go and achieve. Because what kid doesn't want to go to school, or doesn't want to go to college, or doesn't want to go to make sure that even if they're in a trade, how do I get to the next level of trade? And that information, particularly it seems as senior year, unless you have the information and you're around those right people, whatever program that might already be, you're kind of there to just fend for it yourself. And hopefully your parent might have already went to school. And that's what kind of what aided with me is my mom going to school and having her master's. But for those that didn't have those extra benefits or those extra resources, they have the one day, I think, out of the year where you can go and do your FAFSA on like the computer lab on the first floor, where there's 35 families at a time going in, and there's like 2 to 3 people from Ringe going to help you. And like, that's great. But I know that there's more people within the city that know how to help out with FAFSA. So like, what are we doing to make sure that we're providing the extra attention and utilizing these resources to make sure that people's FAFSAs aren't messed up, to make sure that they're being able to apply for the right scholarships. Like even the scholarship program that they have at the end of the year for Ringe, there were a minute amount of people of color there. So I was fortunate. I was racking up to be told, but that shouldn't have been limited to just me or some of the other individuals that were fortunate like me. It should have been applicable to everybody that should have been able to grab that, or different types of scholarships within and throughout the city and different opportunities. So I know that was a very long answer, but
no, that was hard. But you made me think about something, Nico. As young adults, we've done everything. To Elijah's point, done everything, for the most part, I would assume, right. Attended class, graduated high school, got good grades, went to college, and graduated. What was it like to come back home with your degree in hand?
Yeah,
and not to be loved by your community?
Definitely. Like Elijah, I want to make one point to the last thing he said, and then I'll answer your question.
Please do.
I think one of the things, like when we look at why kids aren't taking these AP tests, right? It's because just to get there is to climb Mount Everest, right? And I'll use myself as an example, right? Coming out of middle school, right? I was recommended for all CP classes, right?
Can you talk about that a little bit?
And again, I think it's across the board. I think you have to call it individual teachers, right? But I think there's a tendency to, put people on a track, right? And I think it's a rush decision because people have their whole lives to grow and to change and to learn. But I'll, again, use myself as an example. My middle school teachers try to put me on a CP track. Luckily, I have people in my corner, right, to advocate and believe in me. So I went the honors track, right? But then you show up, you're the only Black kid in the honors class, right? Everyone is looking at you, right? Even if these people are friendly and nice with a smile, right? It's all eyes on you because you're there almost expected to fail, right? And again, I will speak to my experience, but I know this is true for countless other kids of color, right? You have guidance counselors at the high school constantly selling you short, right? Again, right, I went on to work for the Boston Globe and NPR. My junior year of high school, my guidance counselor told me that I shouldn't take journalism or AP Lang or AP Lit because those classes might be too advanced, right? And again, luckily I have people in my corner pushing me to think and dream a little bit bigger. But for a lot of people, just getting there after all of that naysaying is the accomplishment. And I just don't think people realize how much of an Everest, right? How much of a peak just getting there really is, when everyone along the way for your 4-year journey at Ringe is telling you don't belong. And I think eventually it's just, you finally get there, and that's just enough for you to be there. And I think, I know countless peers of mine who share that similar experience. Would you remind me of your second question?
Well, essentially, you did everything.
Yes.
Came here, you did everything, and you came back. I'm not saying to come back to anything, but in terms of you didn't come back to the innovation, the innovation economy.
Yeah.
Where you set up for success, right? And if not,
well, the example I always use, right, is a casino, right? So, right, being black and brown, right, being a minority student, right, you're constantly betting against the house, right? And right, so you bet against the house in high school, and you do everything right, like you said, and you go on to the next stage, and that's college. So you start thinking to yourself, wow, okay, I beat the house, I did everything right. So then you go again, you double down in college, and then you do everything right, you get the good grades, you come out of it, graduate, etc. You're like, wow, I beat the house again. And you think that all this hard work has finally leveled you out, right? You're walking across that stage and college, and you're level with everyone there getting the same degree. The problem is, it's all the stuff that happens outside of it, right? So the things that, we're not exposed to, things like credit, right? Things like loans, right? Things like all the other stuff that will actually, right, keeps the scales in an unfair balance. And I think that's one of the biggest hurdles of people coming out of, because they've doubled down, they've beat the house, or at least they think they have, and they get there and you don't realize just how far behind you still are. And I think that's a really hard experience for a lot of students who do graduate college and do get to that's so to speak, the top. Because coming back is really, really, really hard because of all the ways you're still so far behind all your peers.
Let me ask you a follow-up question. Cambridge as a city, there's a lot of great things. I'm not, part of why we have the public square, part of why we do the things in which, we do, particularly with MBK, and I'm certain as individuals, and all the folks who are on this call tonight, I appreciate each and one of them because they could be somewhere else. But one thing I find fascinating about what you're talking about is that there is this truth conversation that's not happening possibly at the high school. Some may say it's too early to have it when they're in middle school, whatever. What about the idea of putting kids of color in a room, auditorium, and say, look, I know that we have sold you on this utopian idea, right? I know it's like this, we have this republic, it's this eclectic model, right? However, even in our own community, we are rife with disparity, and we have plenty inequities here. Now, they are going to be exasperated in other places, but let me tell you what they are, and hopefully we can kind of curb, what you're going to go through upon leaving these doors. I mean, do we do a disservice of not having that conversation with our young people sooner than later?
Yeah, 100%. I say that, right, it's the opportunity gap. So it's all the stuff that so you can work as hard as you want as a student, right, to do your best to close that achievement gap, in your own way. But it's when you go home, it's the things that you're learning outside of the classroom that are going to come back to bite you in the butt later on, right? So, kids are learning about investing. They're learning about credit, right? They're learning about things, home ownership. They're seeing their family live these things, and they're learning directly from it. And unfortunately, right, poor kids don't have that same opportunity, even with the best intentioned parents. And I think because of that, I think a lot of times you try to navigate these pitfalls, but sometimes you don't even know that they're there. So when you finally, right, you get to the top, that's when they come back to get you because you've done your way to snake your way through all these different pitfalls. But again, you're kind of doing it with a blindfold on because you don't realize just how much you're missing out on outside of the classroom. And I think, yes, 100%. I think you should sit down, kids, and warn them about all these other things, right? So that way, when they do, find a way to make it to the top, right, they won't be held back by all these things that they didn't learn about in the past.
So, Chrissy, yours,
right quick.
Yeah, you got it.
To the point that you said of having a serious conversation, I think is very needed because we've, at least in the time that I'm sure that Chrissy and Nico and I were all in school, there's the words of opportunity and diversity, and I always forget the other one, but whatever those words are, you kind of buy into it as a kid, you know, like we live in this melting pot, we live in the People's Republic. We feel as if we are vastly different than everywhere else in the world, because we feel as if we're accepting of one another and we truly get one another. We embrace one another for their differences. The majority of us, like we said, a decent amount of us go to Leslie, but the majority of us don't go to a school within the city. So we're going out of state, and you get the curtain or the blinders come off. You see the world for what it is.
Stay there for a second, Elijah. I want to ask you, because you're speaking, I want to kind of throw something at you. Should there be a social compact between the city and students relative to employment, housing opportunities, et cetera? Doesn't the city have a responsibility to its residents to have, to talk about everything you're talking about, maybe creating some type of social contract around this work as relative to housing and and employment opportunities for the particular population you speak to?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I feel as if we as a city, do very well. That's speaking objectively. So I feel as if there should be some type of garner of opportunities that lead to some type of career path or actual job sustainability where you're making beyond that 30, really 45, 50,000, where you're able to achieve success based off of the merit and all the hard work that we just put in. So particularly for employment opportunities, finding different aspects within the city where there are definitely holes, and we acknowledge that there's all holes, whether that's greater education reform, greater housing reform, maybe a ED&I task force. And I even hate that, because then that obviously drags individuals into such a box and corner. But different ways within the city of the different holes that we have beyond of actual social and human capital, and beyond maybe more arbitrary things. I do love bikes and I do love trees, don't get me wrong, but there are definitely things in the city that we just acknowledge of actual disparities that we're having all these individuals, particularly as Nico just said and Chrissy just said, that people of color are coming and studying what the issues are that have affected us throughout our whole lives. And we're not then being able to come back into the city and use and utilize our knowledge to then go and make that impact. So like if all the kids from the 2013, 2014, and 2015 class, just as a result, or just like spitballing, were able to have Louis Air once a month, I'm like, all right, these are the issues in the city. Or have the city council's air once a month, these are the issues in the city. Or like with the potential youth council of, all right, what do you guys feel the issues in the city? What do we feel the issues are in the city as the individuals that are where you will be? And how can we come to the city, make a pact, and then figure out like beyond a participatory budget? It's very nice. I love it. And I love that ability of making it appear that our words and our actions matter. But we, as we already acknowledge, aren't the vast majority of individuals in that city. So our voices and the issues that we feel as if are more pertinent, I would say, are more life-threatening, I will say, or more economically, social, emotional, socioeconomical, impactful, always end up getting drowned out. So how can we have an ability to have the ear of those of the decision makers within the city to make sure that our actual needs are being met? So that's in economically. Housing, like I said, not only is it just the inclusionary program, because then that's 30% of our income, which then how are we still being able to make equity, and how are we still being able to invest and do all these different things to make sure that we can eventually end up owning a house. But even with the homeowners buyer, the first time homeowners buyers program, that's the way that it's said. If I'm mistaken, please correct me. But we're putting all this money into this house. That might be $400,000. It's definitely more in Cambridge. Maybe it's like 3 times that much, but let's say it's $400,000. And by the time that equates equity, then we're just selling it back to the city.
Quick follow up. So you mentioned something. I think that I would, I thought what you said was brilliant, particularly as it relates to, a younger cohort of folks around the relationship of having maybe 25, 26-year-olds at the table, right? I think that'd be fascinating to do that. But I'm going to move to Chrissy for a second. I have 2 questions for you, but I want to know if you want to add anything to that particular topic that we were just speaking to. And then I want to ask you a question where hopefully you can put on your social work hat for us and kind of help us work through that.
Yeah, hit me with the social work question.
Okay. So one of the things that I know that I have been myself, guilty of in the past and trying to do a better job of it is that oftentimes, because we are such a city with the number of, I guess we are said to have a great deal of resources, right?
Yeah.
However, we become very marred in our deficits, what we don't do well, or what doesn't do, how we don't do this well, and what's not going on here well. And so, how do you navigate the deficits? How do you help folks navigate the deficits to see that, this isn't really an asset-based community, even when you don't feel like that? So obviously there has to be some social and emotional SEL work that's going on there, but also having that tough conversation with yourself around, look, why are we constantly going back to the deficits in this said to be resource-rich community? So help us navigate.
Yeah, so, okay. So yes, we are a resource saturated community. I think a lot of the issues are that we reinvent the wheel often. I think that there are a lot of programs that copy, not copy, but do a lot of the same work. And so, which can be a great thing. But what I think would help is a more focused approach. Like, who are we trying to target? And I think that's like where we'll see some help, like in those areas. I think that yeah, like I think it's just more targeted approach when working with populations. And I'm kind of forgetting your question, so if you want to remind me, I think I can expand a little bit more.
Well, no, I think in terms of, so let's say, for example, you mentioned social workers, right? So let's take we need to have more social workers in our school. I think we're actually adding some more social workers to the school. But what does that? So we have the social worker. Have we identified, kind of to your points, why we have the social worker? Who's those social work going to work with? What is the 1 year goal? What is the 5-year goal? Why don't we, can we do a better job of just not throwing something out there, but really having a plan to implement it to the point she was making? So just throwing that back at you.
Yeah. So, okay. So like kind of like a treatment plan almost. Like that's how I think of it, is you're looking for a certain outcome, and that requires taking specific steps to get there. And kind of just like imitating that approach to the kind of work that we want to do, like having clear steps of where we want to be in a certain time frame and having clear objectives on how to get there. And I think as a role of the social worker, if there's enough of us, that allows us to, have a specific group of young people we're working with in those families. And that's where I think we'll see the change happen, because we can have one social worker for a school that has like 400, 500 kids. That just, you can't follow up with 400, 500 kids plus their families. That makes it impossible. And so, yeah, back to the treatment, kind of like treating our goals as a treatment plan, having those clear objectives and having enough social workers for a smaller cohort to work with. And that way it's more individually driven care.
Awesome. So as we're starting to come to the end, and one of the things that the program, the report mentions a great deal of that fascinates me is money, and particularly equity. I remember my first time, when I first bought a home, the excitement that came with it. I remember the first time, when I thought before a home, a condo, like those experiences were exciting to me. But one thing in terms of that was very startling with this report, and I just want to, some of these questions may be personal, and please don't feel like you need to answer them. So I just want to ask this question. Anyone can jump in. So you graduated, and now you're starting your career, right? You've done everything right? But the median cost of a 1-bedroom condo for 500 square feet is $498,000 here in the city. Do you aspire to achieve home ownership if you don't already? And do you believe you'll be able to buy in your own city? You go, Maddie. I'm sorry, you go, Chrissy first.
Yeah, no. Honestly, probably not. I would love more than anything in the world to be able to purchase a home in Cambridge and stay and be here. That's what I want. Unfortunately, I don't think it's in my future. I look all the time, I shop on Zillow. It's just not a possibility of mine, especially with the type of budget a social worker is given.
Okay. Real quick, Elijah, then Nico, and then I'm gonna play a little game, and you guys are gonna help us lead this city in a different way. Nico or Elijah, who wants to jump in? 90 seconds.
Yeah, I'll take it. I actually had a great conversation with my mom the other day. We were just crunching the numbers. I wanted to show her, right? We've lived in a couple different apartments, like Booker said. That's just the reality for kids of color in the city. Lived in all parts of Cambridge, but we've been here in the Port for the last 10 years. So I just took this apartment that we've been in for the last 10 years, right? The amount that she's paid is almost close to $125,000, right? To live in respectfully a shitty Section 8 apartment, right? And that's the reality, right? But we don't have any equity in this apartment, right? And anytime they could tell us to leave, right? There's nothing that's keeping us here, right? We've shelled out, or she has shelled out all this money, right? For essentially nothing, right? When all of that money could be put, right, on a path to ownership, right? And that's a whole other bag, right? But we need more programs of rent to own, not just for families, but for recent grads as well. And that's just the reality of the city, because, right, then it becomes again, the trap of poverty, right? Of just paying out endless amounts of money without ever seeing any return on that investment. And that's really upsetting. And I think a lot of people have yet to crunch those numbers and really think about how much money they're putting into things that they don't own. And we have too many resources in this city for that to be a reality. Now, me personally, right, having you and someone like Ty as a mentor, right, I absolutely believe that I'm going to be a homeowner in Cambridge. Call that delusional confidence, right? But that's just, this is my home, and I refuse, right, to not be a part of the community that I call home. It may take 5 years, it may take 10. Right. But and that's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this work, is because without it, right, where do we go? And the answer is elsewhere. And that's really unfortunate. So with that being said, I'll pass to Booker.
Booker?
I believe that I will own a home. Yeah. Luckily on my dad's side, we already own a home in Dorchester. So that in itself, I feel as if I've been able to, I guess, cross off that margin there. But within the city of Cambridge, I have a pie in the sky dream of owning a house on Brattle Street and being authentically me. I might get kicked out of the neighborhood, but that's a whole other conversation. But truthfully, I feel as if I'll rent here. I feel as if we all want the ability for our kids to go here. But the more and more we have these conversations, and the more and more we look at every aspect of economic, education, housing, do we still want to be here is the question that we need to ask ourselves. Because if the city is slowly ripping off at the seams, and it's not the city that we know and love anymore, and it's not the city that seems to be for us anymore, are we clinging on to it because we still love it, or we're clinging on to it because it's the imagined past that we feel as if we still have the ties to the city, that we love it, but it might not love us anymore? So that's the decision that I would be making by the time that, I pay these loans off and get a wife and all those other good things. But by the time that comes, that's a serious question I need to ask myself is, am I doing it because I truly still love the city and feel as if I can grow and prosper and raise a family here? Or am I doing it just because I feel as if selfishly, I want to live in Cambridge? I'm clinging on to this pseudo exceptionalism, the melting pot that Cambridge is. But it just doesn't seem like it. It has been that since the 2008 report. And I would be fearful to think if there was another report in 10 to 15 years, we would still continue to see the same trend unless something is changing.
All right. So before we end, I want to kind of pivot a little bit, and I'm going to give each one of you a role that hopefully you guys will consider in the future. So, Chrissy, you will assume the role as Assistant City Manager for Human Services. Nico, you will assume the role of City Manager, and Elijah, you will assume the role of Superintendent of Schools, all of Cambridge. So now you guys are in charge. So you have autonomy to do your thing. So Chrissy, understanding, the perch of all the great things that, you have done and seek to do around, helping our young people from as young as birth to as old as 20s, 30s. You are the assistant city manager for human services. What are three things that you would want to put forth to help this city move?
Okay, so definitely a family readiness program. I'd like to see more support for families who just had babies, or who just welcome babies into their families. Um, I would like to see more staff of color, assuming full-time roles, not just part-time, because those have high turnover rates and they don't offer benefits. It makes it hard to like kind of have income. And another thing I would like to see is some more promoting from within. I think I worked as a youth worker in the city of Cambridge, and so it's almost kind of like you're working with your high school peers. You've moved on from high school and now you're working together. And so it's a great feeling to be around people and working with people that and have similar values to. And so I would like to see just more of these folks getting better jobs, more full-time jobs, and incorporating them into the programs and letting them design, because those are the people that spend the most time with our youth. Those are the people that know our youth and know what they need. And so I would like to see more growth within that sector.
Awesome. Superintendent Booker.
Can you repeat the question?
You're the superintendent of schools.
What would I do?
We need three things that you want to do, and you gotta do them. Let us know. What you're gonna do to help our schools move.
I'm good with one with, like, I guess, talking points. So I'll boil it down as in information circulation, access, and action. One of my first major moves is making sure that there is a more of a coherence and more of a synergy between schools from top down. So again, I went from Cambridge before. I know a lot of other individuals that went to other schools throughout, of whether that was a middle school and or a grade school. But it seems as if we were all learning different things. We were all at different levels, and it seems like we were all learning different content. So having some more of a synergy within schools, I think, would be a step in that. Greater access amongst families. So they had the report of, I think it was 11% of Latinx and Black households that were without internet access. So expanding that, whether that's at the youth centers, whether that's at the centers of the public housing, or, I mean, that's a conversation of broadband, which is more of the superintendent. So I'll go and defer that to Nico, but making sure that kids have greater access to information, making sure that there's mentors and individuals that are have greater information within the schools, whether that's through the schools, whether that's through like the middle to grade schools up to the high school, making sure. So the access part would be making sure that kids have access not only to technology within the other unified partners of Harvard, MIT, and Lesley, making sure there's more mentors, as well as probably like more scholarships as well coming from those universities. But then also making sure that these kids have access to information that they actually want to learn. So some of the biggest things is not that we have, and I don't mean to say this in a bad way, it's not that we have dumb kids. We have kids that are learning things that they might not be interested in. So a kid might not be interested in learning about what happened to the Civil War for the 50th time, but if you teach them about the Harlem Renaissance, that might be something that that might be something he's interested in. If you're teaching kids, particularly kids of color, about a history that does not pertain to them, how do you expect them to continually to stay interested? If you're teaching them about aspects that might not relate to them, if we're only sending 83, I think, kids of color that are graduating high school, I think it's like 92 for white kids or 93 for the whole population, and only like 40% of them are actually end up graduating with a accredited degree in 6 years, then we're not preparing them for actual success. So why aren't we teaching them the content and knowledge of taxes, of loans, of equity, of stocks, of the things that actually, the people that in the real world, of how they actually end up obtaining and actually getting ahead? Why aren't we making sure that we're designated time to make sure that these kids are having that, not at junior and senior year? Why aren't we teaching that more, even in our algebra and our geometry problems? Like making sure that we still teach the content that's regulated and needed by DESE, but making sure we're applying real life applications by that. And then what I said, information, action, access, and action. The action is making sure that we have all the individuals that are being able to do that. So particularly with the kids that are coming back in school, social workers, teachers, all these individuals that are coming back to help, making sure that we are prioritizing those individuals to work in our schools and work in our schooling system, because they might not have a accredited degree from Harvard, but they're going to understand that Cambridge kid better than a kid from Harvard that might be coming from Idaho. That's just my true perspective on it. And then making sure that the individuals in the universities and the individuals that are coming back into the city, that would be something I'd have to talk to the city manager about, but making sure that those individuals are getting paid, even if it's a $20,000 part-time job throughout the year, while they're also looking for something. Hey, I have Timmy. I'm going to have Timmy for the whole year. You have to talk to him 5 hours out of the week, making sure that he's on his college essay, making sure that he's staying up to date on FAFSA dates and college deadlines. Like, these are things that can be implemented with the individuals that we're having in the city. And because we're not having them utilized, our kids are suffering because they're not having the proper mentors. You can only expect a social worker or a city councilor can't take on 300 kids per cohort. So utilizing those individuals that have already been through the process and have been successful, and then having greater connections with those on the outside of the universities that also want to help and make an impact within their schooling. And then also just having greater conversations between the students, the parents, and all the stakeholders, essentially between the superintendent, the city, the school committee, the teachers, and the parents and the children. Whatever that is, I still have to think about, but making sure there's more of an intersection, because right now we're all separate entities. And if COVID has taught us anything, we're our own private stakeholders wanting what we want, but not realizing that there needs to be some engagement to get to the true end goal, which is childhood success and student success. Sorry, I tried to solve the whole issue in about 10 minutes, but that's what I got.
Hey, we needed you these last 15 months. All right. City manager, Mr. City Manager, thoughts?
100%. And I do think it's telling that you didn't give any of us the title of mayor, but that's a conversation for another day.
Well, that's a conversation the city may need to make on its own to create a charter, and so that we have a strong mayor. But hopefully that shifts, right?
As city manager, here's the first thing I'm doing. I spoke about this earlier, right? One of the traps, right, and it's to no fault of our own, is that we are products of the system. So when we make it out, we come back to help, which is a beautiful thing, right? I've devoted my entire life to this. So as you and everyone else on this call. As city manager, I would reward that, right? So like the military, like the Peace Corps, like City Year, right? If you are a city employee, or if you're in the, working in the youth centers or in the schools, right? And you want to give 5 years of your time after graduation to the city, well, then maybe I'm forgiving your loans, right? Or I'm finding a way for you to finance school. And I think that's very realistic. And I think this goes to my next point. And I wish this was an original idea. This is a culmination of everyone here on this call, right? But this conversation on reparations, right? So while Elijah and Chrissy were talking, I'm looking
again for the folks who can't hear you.
For the reparations.
All right.
while Chrissy and Elijah were talking, right, I'm crunching the numbers, right? So our participatory budget, right, is $1 million. We get to it's throwaway money, $1 million to go, plant some trees and build some park benches, which is great, right? But that's just the reality. With that $1 million, right? So 1 million divided by 50,000, right? On average, we have about $50,000 of student debt. That could pay 20 students a year, right, to erase their student debt, right? So just to think about how small and insignificant that number is, right? And we know it's just one of 3, RINS graduates who may obtain a degree within their 5 years of graduating, right? So it's a small number already, right? That number needs to be rewarded. And I think just looking at that number to the context of participatory budgeting is very telling, right? And if you could start with just $1 million and say, if you're Black in this city and you graduate, right, college or university program or higher education, right, within 5 years of attending CRLS, right, we will forgive, right, $50,000, right, of your loans. And I think when you look at those numbers, that's very realistic. And we know how much money Cambridge has. So if anything, those numbers should be much higher, right? But we're only looking at the lens of that throwaway money. The third and last thing that I would do, right, is, and I think Booker and Chrissy spoke to this already, right, but is to close the digital divide, right? And whether, there's a lot of talk in the city right now on feasibility and ways to do that appropriately, right? And I think oftentimes it gets thrown around this idea that it's actually sometimes cheaper if we just paid everyone's Comcast bill opposed to having our own thing. But that's not for me to decide right now. There's smarter people more tech savvy people to have that discussion. But the internet, right, having consistent access to the internet and to technology, right, is a huge indicator, right, of not just your success in the classroom, but your growth outside of it, right? And you can use this technology, you can use this internet, right, to see just how big the world really is, right? I had an amazing conversation with Ty over quarantine about investing, and he was giving me all this great mentorship and advice. First thing he told me, he said, go to YouTube University, right? When you're learning foreign languages, it's online, right? All these things that make you a global citizen, that make you to think bigger, happens in a digital space. And I'll end by saying this, right? Working at home for the last year and a half, right? What you don't realize too is not just having access to the internet, right? But having strong enough broadband for everybody in the house. This was the first time where everyone's home, right? And mom's at work on Zoom. I'm at work in my room on Zoom. My sister is doing school on her Zoom, plus all of our phones. All of those devices are just draining the internet. So many times where my Zoom's cutting out and all this other stuff. And I know that that's a relatively small family. I know there's much bigger families sharing the same amount of broadband, right? So making sure not just access, but making sure that it's strong enough, right, for families to actually utilize it in a way that's fast and efficient, and all those things. So we're programs coming out of college that reward people for working in the city and fixing the problems that the city should fix themselves, right? A conversation around reparations, and closing the digital divide, right? I think those three things are not that expensive, and they're not that big of an ask. And if the numbers are really this low, it shouldn't be a problem.
Awesome. I just want to say that I appreciate all of you guys, and I love the ingenuity and your spirit, and you guys have empowered me. I have one question, a last question before we end, and I just wanted to just really, before we end, just to kind of give some information. This episode will re-air this Sunday at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. on Monday at 3 p.m. And we also will have a video that will be furnished on YouTube on Monday as well. And so just type in the public square, City View 22. And I want to, before we end, my last question, I want to once again, thank Danielle Jones, Ty Belletti, and Calvin Lindsay for their work in producing this show. But I also want to thank Meta Landry, who's been instrumental in really kind of helping us on time, making sure our videos are running. And I just want to, give you a shout out, Matt, and thank you for the enormous work that you do behind this work. And so before I end, I have one question, and then before we close out, we'll have a video as well. And I just want to once again thank everybody for coming. So I use the word love, and I often use that because I think it's an important word to use, and one in which James Baldwin used a great deal when he talked about his love for America and why in which he was critical of the country in which he was born. Very similar to a lot of the conversation that Nicole Hannah-Jones speaks to in her piece in the New York Times 1619 Project. So I'm just speaking to you, and I talk about 1619 Project, Superintendent Booker. Hopefully it will resonate and we'll get it in our schools sooner rather than later. But I will have just one question, and it's a relatively straightforward one, but obviously you could expound upon it. And I'll just take no longer than 90 seconds, please. And I'll start with you, Elijah. Do you feel your city loves you?
Do I feel as if my city loves me? Yes, I feel as if my city loves me. I just don't feel as if my city knows how to take care of me. I'll leave it at that.
Chrissy?
Yeah, I feel like my city loves me. I feel like when I walk back into Ringe, I'm celebrated. I feel welcomed at times, definitely not always, but yeah, I do feel like my city loves me.
Nico?
I think that, of course, the city loves me, but they love this version of me. And there's another version of me that exists somewhere else in the city who is getting left behind, right? And that's unacceptable.
Awesome. I want to once again thank Chrissy Robinson, Elijah Booker, Nico Emack. Thank you for your courage and your voices. And as I said before, we're going to close out with the video, and thank you everyone for signing on today. And thank you for all the work that each one of us does, each one of you does for this particular city to make it great. So thank you and good night.
In my 10th grade literature class, my students analyzed the work of classic Greek philosophers in order to understand the foundation of Western thought and the principles of the English language. In the back left-hand corner of the class sits Kevin, a 15-year-old boy with academic apathy embroidered on his eyelids and a stardust disposition that can be seen all the way from the other side of this 1960s kaleidoscope of a hallway. Keeps his head face down on his desk because with no father, he says he's never known a man in this world worth looking up to. But I try to engage him anyway. I try to connect this excerpt from a 1,000-year-old text to the world he wakes up to every morning, and some days I'm more successful than others. But today, Kevin comes up to me after class and says, "Mr. Smith, why do we even read this stuff anyway?" So I tell him, Kevin, Socrates was killed for political dissension. This world wants to see you killed by giving a suspension. His time was more similar to yours than you think, but now Athenian and Spartan militias manifest themselves in bandanas and brown skins. So I beg of you, don't become part of a war in which you were never meant to fight. Listen, Aristotle says we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. So you better act like you have it, because the only difference between you and these Greek philosophers is the scraggly beard, the wrinkly skin, and that silly-looking robe. But your ideas are no less profound, your insights no less enlightening, your values no less important. There are brilliant words bubbling from the ballpoint tip of your pen if you would just take off the cap. But what do I know? I'm just a 25-year-old public school teacher who continuously questions everything he's ever known. We have skin of a common complexion, but a lifetime of experiences more dissimilar than the solar system. So who am I to come into this classroom and tell you what to do? A quarter lifetime worth of missteps has taught me that my savior complex is something I need to shed from my skin. So trust, I'm not trying to save you, because I'm still trying to save myself. Honestly, how can I teach him to believe in Plato when gentrification is taught to me as nothing more than Play-Doh, something to be moved and molded at will by those doing the sculpting? So there's only one thing left to do. Become the sculptor and not the sculpted. Become the statistician and not the statistic. Kevin, I'm not perfect. I'm just a teacher trying to get you to understand all that you are already capable of doing. So I have no choice but to make sure you understand how to dissect this text, because nobody's pity is going to get you into college. We will work until concepts like the prison industrial complex and the achievement gap are archived into the library of America's imperfections. You will learn to read critically, write consciously, speak clearly, because that is the only way this world will ever listen to what you have to say. So let's make this world see you in more than just Jordans and prisons. Let's flip that and let them see you with college admissions. Show them you are more than just a jumble of brown-faced quantitative data on charts and spreadsheets. Show them there is an Aristotle awaiting to be awakened in your chest. Show them there is a Plato pumping potential through your veins. Show them there is a Socrates ready to spring forth from your throat. Your Mount Olympus is standing right in front of your face. So now it's time to pick up your head and start climbing.